Good morning, everyone, and a very warm welcome to today's webinar, Your Guide to HMRC Submissions. My name's Alice, and I'm going to be your host and presenter for the session today. And I'm also joined by my colleague Duncan, who's going to be kind of behind the scenes, ready to answer your questions in the Q&A. And let's also take a look at what we'll be covering in the session. So I'll begin with a bit of an introduction to RTI, so what it is, kind of what real-time information is. And then we'll have the main section of the webinar, and this is going to be all about your HMRC submissions. So it's going to be what they are, what information they include, when to send them, and also how to send them in the programme too for a couple of the main ones, like the FPS and EPS and things like that. We'll then take a look at the eSubmissions log and FPS viewer, which are two kind of features that you can check the submissions that you've sent in. And then a quick look at the personal tax account too, so what exactly it is and some of the key features and benefits. But let's begin with that introduction to RTI then. So RTI stands for Real-Time Information, and it's a system where employers report payroll data to HMRC, ensuring up-to-date and accurate tax records. Now, it's not been around forever, but it was introduced to employers operating a PAYE scheme in April 2013. Now, previously, employers would have submitted certain forms to HMRC at the end of the tax year, which had these details on, and also forms when they had any starters or leavers and things like that. But RTI, of course, has changed all of that, as the RTI submissions do include all of the information that HMRC need. So no more paper forms, and instead it is reported more regularly too. But employers must report PAYE to HMRC every time they pay their employees on or before the pay date, and this is called the FPS, or full payment submission. So if you did a weekly payroll, for example, and let's say your next pay date was this Friday, so Friday the 22nd of November, you would have to report the payroll data for that week on the 22nd or before the 22nd. And the same principle applies to all of the different payment frequencies too. Now, if you've not paid any employees in a tax month, you do also need to notify HMRC that no payment is due. So this will be a different submission, and it's called an EPS, or Employer Payment Summary. And there are other scenarios where you would send an EPS to HMRC, but we will get into that a little bit later. But RTI, sorry, not HMRC, RTI, it is a mandatory system introduced by HMRC, and it is important that you do remain compliant and meet the deadlines. If employers don't comply with the RTI requirements, not only could this lead to incorrect tax and national insurance records for your employees, but as an employer, it would lead to consequences, including penalties or specific charges. But of course, if you do have any queries or kind of questions with these deadlines and requirements, I would advise you contact HMRC themselves. We've got some helpful links to further support throughout these slides as well, so be sure to download the handouts and read a little bit more about them. But in order to actually submit this payroll data and meet those RTI requirements, employers do need to set up a government gateway account to access HMRC's online services. Now, normally it's your login for this account which connects the payroll to your government gateway account to be able to submit that data across to HMRC. This also gives employers access to the HMRC PAYE online service, and this gives you access to loads of handy resources online, such as checking what you owe HMRC, paying your bills, seeing payment history, accessing tax codes and notices about your employees, and so much more. So a lot of you probably already have the government gateway account set up for yourselves, but for any of you who are new to payroll, definitely worth looking into and just making sure that you are all set up on that side of things too. But on a lighter note, let's have a little bit of a look at a timeline of RTI that I've put together. And we actually begin back in 1944. So this was the introduction of the pay-as-you-earn system. And this was introduced to streamline the collection of income tax directly from employees' wages, and more regularly too. Whereas previously people would complete an annual assessment and they would only pay the tax due a few times during the year. Next, we jump to 2004 to 2005 with online reporting, and this is where employers began submitting PAYE information online, and this marks the first major shift towards digital reporting. Then next we do have a little jump forward to April 2012, where the phased introduction of RTI began. So the RTI pilot started in April 2012 with a small group of volunteer employers and increased in 3 stages up through to March 2013, by which time over 6 million individual records were being reported in real time. And then off the back of that, a month later, in April 2013, a year later, RTI did become mandatory for all employers, requiring them to submit payroll data to HMRC on or before each payday. And then, of course, today, RTI is fully integrated into the payroll process, and it does ensure accurate and timely reporting to HMRC. So just thought it was quite interesting seeing the kind of different timestamps there. Did want to include a little bit about that today. But without further ado, let's move on to our kind of main section of the webinar. This is going to be all about those HMRC submissions. I'm going to be breaking them down and kind of telling you what they are and how to send them to. And we'll begin with probably the most common submission here, which is going to be the full payment submission, or the FPS. So as we now know, you do need to send an FPS each time you pay your employees to notify HMRC of the liabilities in the payment period and your payroll data. And all employees who are paid must be included. The liability is made up of the following information here. So it's the PAYE, the employer's national insurance contributions, employees' national insurance contributions, student loan and postgraduate loan. And when I say liabilities in the payment period, that actually refers to the amount of money that a business or individual owes to HMRC. So essentially, it's just the money that you owe them. But the liability isn't the only thing that makes up the FPS though. It does also include some more information, including payment and deduction details, employer information, tax and national insurance information, new starters and leavers, employee pension contributions, student loan indicators, and payment dates too. So quite a lot of information does make up this submission. And although you normally can't see all of this information going across in the FPS, it is there, it's just been sent across in the background. But that's what the FPS includes, and a little reminder of when it's needed to be sent as well. So it must be submitted after processing each pay run on or before the pay date. So I run a monthly payroll, for example. My next pay date will be the 30th of November. So I need to make sure that my FPS is submitted on or before the 30th of November. And you also only need to send 1 FPS per payment frequency and per payment period. So again, same example, monthly payroll, it'll be once per month. Weekly payroll, once per week, fortnight, 4 weeks, etc. So whatever your payment frequency is. And actually, payroll won't let you send more than 1 FPS per period for the employees too. So it does kind of stop you from duplicating anything there. But if you do run a payroll where you've got monthly and weekly staff, what you would do is send 1 FPS, including all of your monthly employees when you process them. Then each week, when you process your weekly staff, you would send an FPS including all of your weekly employees each week. And what is the FPS used for? Well, HMRC do use the FPS to keep track of the employees' pay, tax, and of course national insurance contributions. And it also helps to ensure more accurate calculations of various benefits to the employees, so it can help to reduce the risk of any overpayments or underpayments. But let's go into Payroll actually. We'll take a look at how to submit the FPS from Payroll. So let me turn my camera off and bring up my company. So here we are, I'm logged in, and as you can see, I have updated my payroll here, 30th of November. So they're all updated with their payments for my November pay date as I run a monthly payroll. But next thing I need to do is to submit the FPS. Now you can submit the FPS from multiple places, including your e-submissions tasks. You do have an option for the full payment submission there. You do also have it in your payroll tasks, which is where I'll be doing it from today, full payment submission. But for those of you who use the process map, if I just turn that on quickly there, you do also have the option for the full payment submission there. So a couple of options, just whichever that you would prefer really. But today I will be doing it from the payroll tasks. Now, still important that you need to check your process date as well before you submit the FPS. I still want my process date to be the 30th of November, and I can see just in the bottom right, it is still set to that, so I'm good to go. And next thing I need to do is just highlight the employees that I would like to include. Now for me, everyone is monthly, so I'll just highlight everybody. But for you, for example, you might have half monthly staff, half weekly staff. You just need to highlight the people that you want to include in this full payment submission. And then go ahead and click full payment submission. With this, it is nice and straightforward to do. It is just a case of kind of working through this submission window. So first of all, click continue. We've got information, so my government gateway registration there. I've got company details too, so double check these and then click submit. And you do get a kind of nice summary of what's being sent across before you actually go ahead and submit that. So I've got my employees information down here, including the tax period that it's sending for and the liability for each employee too. And if I scroll down, we can actually see I've had a new start to this period, and we can see it's sending across that information to HMRC, including the employee's start date. And if I do want to print a kind of summary of this information here, I can do just using that print button there. But I'll go ahead and click submit, and we'll see this loading bar going across. So this means that your data is being sent to HMRC. And once it's done, you will see a confirmation message. There we go. So the data has been successfully submitted, and you do have the option of clicking there to view and print the submission log, as well as obtain the correlation ID for the submission, which we will come back to a little bit later. But I'll go ahead and click back and just close. And we can see now my last FPS date for my employees is updated, and that has been successfully sent across. But as you can see, it is nice and easy to submit the FPS. Remember, it can also be found on the process map if you're a process map user, or from the e-submissions tasks as well. But you would work through the submission window to send the FPS, and that will include information such as the current period's liabilities, new starter or leaver flags, and some of the details, including what your pay date is too. Now, next submission that I do want to talk about, probably another one of the main HMRC submissions, is the EPS, or Employer Payment Summary. This submission is sent to report values to HMRC that aren't included in the FPS. So this could be things such as statutory payments, CIS deductions, apprenticeship levy, or even to inform HMRC that no payment is due in a particular tax month. And you only need to send the EPS if one of those apply to you. When should it be sent? Well, it should be sent by the 19th of the following tax month. So for example, November's EPS would need to be sent by the 19th of December, which is the following month. And something that actually differs between the FPS and EPS is how often you send it to, as the EPS only needs to be sent once per tax month, and that is regardless of your payment frequency. So even if you do pay your staff more often than monthly, for example, weekly or fortnightly, the EPS is like a month-end task. So once you've processed all the payment periods in the tax month, that is when you would send it. The easiest way to think of it is the FPS tells HMRC how much you need to pay them, but the EPS actually tells HMRC how much you're reducing that payment by. So it allows you to apply for a reduction in your liability. And a couple of top tips from us as well. If you do forget to send the EPS by the deadline for the tax month, you can submit an EPS when you process the next period. So each employer payment summary will include year-to-date values, and HMRC will receive the totals for the tax year so far. So if you forget to send it for November, for example, you are okay just sending next month's, and it will include November's values as well. And if you're not sure whether you do need to send an EPS, another little top tip is to check your P32 report. If you've got a value in the total NIC deductions line, which is line 16 of the P32, you do need to send an EPS. And this could be made up from things like apprenticeship levy or statutory maternity pay, for example. So let's go straight back to payroll, and I will be checking whether I need to send an EPS and of course then submitting that to HMRC. So remember, the EPS is a month-end task, so you would send this once all of your pay runs in the tax month are complete. And we can see just by my last FPS date and last updated date that they are. So I've finished my kind of payrolls for the tax month, and it's just about sending this EPS now. Now, I actually do have an employee on statutory maternity pay, which I'll be reclaiming. So I do need to send an EPS. But for those of you who are unsure whether you need to send one, just run the P32 report. And you can find this actually, there's a quick link to it in your payroll links section. You'll just see P32 report there. But of course, you do also have it in the post-update reports above the employee list too. So let's click on P32 report. And I'm just going to run that for the current tax month, so tax month 8 and 8. And I'll make this a little bit bigger. Here we go. So it's line 16 that I'm going to be looking at, which is total NIC deductions. And I can see that I've got a figure of 876 and 2 pence there. So this means I do need to send an EPS. And in my case, this figure is actually made up from the SMP recovered and the NIC compensation on that SMP. And that's because of one employee I've got who is on statutory maternity pay. So I've checked, I do need to send an EPS. So I'll go ahead and close this report and send that EPS. Now again, a couple of options of where you can find this in the programme. Either just above the P32 report from the payroll links, we do have the option there, or from your e-submissions, you've got the employer payment summary option there too. So I'll click this option, and it does look a little bit different than the FPS first of all. So you won't get the submission window until you've completed this wizard. So as I mentioned, there are some different scenarios where you would need to send the EPS. You would either be adjusting your payment to HMRC because you've got things like statutory payments, or you're reporting apprenticeship levy. So I'm going to select this one. But you also have the option of kind of letting HMRC know that no payment is due for a particular tax month. So it could be the current tax month, the previous tax months, or future months. So you're just going to need to select the statement that's relevant to you and the EPS that you're going to be making. So I'm recovering some statutory payments. So I'll select this first one and then click Next. It'll confirm the tax month. You can't change that, so I'll click Next again. And now we can see the year-to-date figures that it's going to be sending across. So first of all, we've got these statutory payments year-to-dates, and we can see that information there for the maternity pay. So I'll leave that be. But anyone else, any other employees who had statutory parental payment kind of year-to-dates would show in there too. I'll click next. This is where you would enter the value of any CIS deductions suffered, if applicable, which again is a year-to-date figure. So I'll click next on that one. And same with apprenticeship levy, again a year-to-date figure, but I'm going to leave that for now and click next. You do get a message here just to say you are about to inform HMRC that your year-to-date liability will be adjusted by the values that you've entered on the previous pages. So that's exactly what we want. We are applying for a reduction in the liability. So I'll go ahead and click finish. And this is when the submission window comes up for you to work through. So it looks similar to the FPS, but it's slightly different. So let's go ahead and click continue. Again, we've got the gateway registration details and company details. And if I click submit, we don't have quite as much of a breakdown in here as we did with the FPS, but still some company information and things there. So I'll go ahead and click submit on the EPS. Same loading bar going across as it's sending that data to HMRC. And it will be followed up by a confirmation message that that's been successful. And again, you do have the information, the option there to view and print the submission log. But that is the EPS sent. Now, as you can see, there isn't an obvious kind of date stamp or column which will show when the EPS was last sent. That's only for the FPS date here. But I will be coming back to this a little bit later with the e-submissions log so you can check kind of when things have been sent and what was sent to. But that was the employer payment summary and how to send it to from Payroll. So it's going to be from your e-submissions tasks or Payroll link section. And you're going to work through that EPS wizard first of all to select the reason for it and enter any year-to-dates that you need to. And then, of course, use that submission window to submit the EPS. So that's the FPS and EPS. They're definitely the most common submissions for HMRC there. But there are some other ones which I would like to talk about. First one is actually going to be an FPS adjustment. So we know that payroll doesn't go smoothly 100% of the time. There are going to be times where corrections are needed and you've had to kind of roll back or restore a backup to correct something in a payroll that you'd otherwise already completed. And that's completely normal. That does happen. But in that situation, of course, the FPS has already been sent and you can only send one FPS per tax period. HMRC do need to be notified of any corrections that you've made or any adjustments to the liability. So this is when you would need to send an FPS adjustment. Now what this includes is the corrected values for your payroll and any adjustments to the liability. So HMRC, of course, have that latest information for you and your employees. And just to make that clear, you would send this once you've made all of your corrections and your payroll is back up to date again. So for example, let's say I needed to make some corrections to the last few months of payroll. I would roll back and reprocess those periods and update the records for each of them, but I would skip the FPS that has already been sent. Then once I'm back up to date again, I would send one FPS adjustment, which will include the adjustments to every period that I've corrected. So although the submission itself will only show the values for the most recent period that you've corrected, so it will only show the kind of liability adjustment for that, any prior periods that you've amended are going to be included in the submission year-to-dates. So just to recap that, you've sent your normal FPS, but you've then made changes to payroll, which means those figures that were sent are no longer correct. That's why you would need to send an FPS adjustment. And that's going to be done from your payroll tasks, process map, or e-submissions tasks. It's often just underneath the full payment submission option. You will kind of find the FPS adjustment just underneath there. And I have linked more information to the FPS adjustment on this slide too. Whilst we don't have time for a demo, there are some really handy articles there which kind of talk you through exactly what you'll need to do depending on your situation too. But what happens for the EPS too? So if you have made corrections which have affected those year-to-dates for things like stamp duty payments, apprenticeship levy or CIS deductions, you will need to send a new EPS too, but it's not going to be a different submission like the FPS adjustment. It will just be a case of submitting a new EPS in the exact same way with those updated year-to-dates for the tax year. So as long as you've not missed that deadline for the tax month for the EPS, it is just a case of submitting that again. It's not going to duplicate anything, but it will just send across those updated year-to-dates. So those were all submissions for the current tax year. But if you've had to go back and amend a previous tax year's figure, again, HMRC must be notified. So with RTI, you do have the option to submit an FPS adjustment for a previous tax year. And in Sage 50 Payroll, this submission is called Amend a Previous Tax Year. And what this will do is give HMRC the updated year-to-dates for the previous tax year and help to ensure that your employees' records and calculations are correct. Now, something to bear in mind when you are submitting this amendment is that you can't do it if there is processing in the current tax year. So you've made changes to last tax year, for example, and you do need to send these changes to HMRC before reprocessing this tax year. If you do process beyond this and you've got processing in the current tax year, what you'll need to do is roll back the current tax year first, or the submission will come back with an error message. And there are certain situations where you won't be able to use this submission. This is for things like if you're correcting a previous tax year, like earlier than last year, for example, so maybe it's 3 or 4 years ago. In that situation, it might be better for you to use some of HMRC's tools, so to kind of submit those changes outside of payroll. But you do have that option if you need to, and you can read more just with that link that I've linked to HMRC's guidance there. So if you do change anything for a previous tax year, you do have a way of updating HMRC of that. Now, a couple more submissions that I do want to talk about today, just kind of give a bit more information on. First one's actually going to be employment allowance and applying for that. So this is an EPS submission, but it's not the same EPS that we've just spoke about. So this submission will allow you to apply for employment allowance, and it means that eligible employees can reduce their national insurance liability by up to £5,000. So employers will pay less employers' Class 1 national insurance contributions each time that they run payroll until that £5,000 gone or the tax year ends. And you can currently claim employment allowance if you're a business or charity and your Class 1 national insurance liabilities were £100,000 or less in the previous tax year. Now, it is important to mention here these are the current rules, but this will change or be changing from the 6th of April 2025 as employment allowance is increasing and the employer's national insurance to qualify is being removed. But any changes to this, of course, payroll will be updated with all of these changes in the payroll year-end update next year. So don't worry about those changes coming. We will be telling you more about those as they're kind of announced. And of course, the update will include those changes. But back to applying for employment allowance. Ideally, this is applied for at the beginning of a tax year, but that isn't vital. You can actually apply for it and claim it back at any time during the tax year, but the earlier that you apply for it and claim it, the sooner that you'll get that allowance. And it is nice and quick to apply for it too. You can either do this through payroll or through HMRC's basic PAYE tools. So again, a few options for this, just whatever that you would prefer. But if you are doing it from Payroll, let me just show you whereabouts you would do this in the programme. So to apply for employment allowance, you would go to your company tasks and settings. And once this loads up, it's just the first details tab that you're looking for. And you've got a small section at the bottom here, which is all about employment allowance. So you can see I have already applied for employment allowance. I have already ticked this box as well to say that I'm eligible. But what you would do is instead see a button here called Apply for EA. You click on that button, select whether you're applicable or not applicable for state aid, and you would submit that EPS application. So it will look almost identical to a normal EPS. So it's just going to be a case of working through this submission as normal. But we can see instead we do have a flag for this submission to say employment allowance, yes. So that's how you can tell that it's the application for employment allowance. And it would just be a case of sending that across to HMRC. Now, if your application is unsuccessful, you will receive a notification from HMRC, usually within about 5 working days, to let you know this. But if you don't hear back from HMRC at all, this means your application has been successful. So if that's the case and you don't hear from HMRC, you'll be able to select this checkbox here to say that you are eligible for employment allowance. And this will mean that Payroll will begin to calculate that employment allowance in each pay period. So I did just want to kind of show you whereabouts in the programme that was. And last submission that I do want to talk about before the next section, this one's not very common at all, and some of you might not even need to use this at all, but this is a National Insurance Verification Request, or NVR. So if you're unsure what a new or existing employee's national insurance number is, you are able to request this information from HMRC using this submission. And you can submit this from Payroll as a HMRC submission, similar to other RTI submissions, but of course you do also have the option of doing it through HMRC's basic tools. NVRs aren't mandatory either, so some of you, as I said, may never use one of these, you may never send one, but you do only need to submit one when you need to verify or obtain an employee's national insurance number. You might have to wait for a response for this submission too, but in the meantime, you can process payroll without an NI number, and that won't affect an employee's tax and national insurance calculations until you find their number. But of course, employees should be encouraged to apply for and provide their national insurance number as soon as possible, as this can impact elements such as pension tax relief and their state pension benefits too. But again, I have linked more information on NVRs as I won't have time to kind of demonstrate this whole process today. But that is the majority of the RTI submissions out there, what they are and what information they include. Some are sent more regularly, like the FPS, whereas others, like the employment allowance application, for example, is once a year, or something like an NVR, it's not even mandatory, so you may never send one. But if you kind of want to check, what's been sent and when it's been sent, there are a few features that I would like to show you, which are really handy for these submissions. And these are both found in your eSubmissions tasks. We've got the eSubmissions log and the FPS viewer. So starting with the eSubmissions log, this is going to allow you to review submissions and check notices that you've applied to your employees by showing summaries of the submissions. You can filter this log by the submission type, the date and the status of it too, so whether it was successful or not. And it will look a little bit something like what's on that screen there. And it does also have a tab which will show the kind of history of any applied mail. So this could be things like tax code notices or student loan start notifications and things like that. But let's take a bit of a closer look at the eSubmissions log then. So you are able to use drop-downs on the eSubmissions log to filter the view. Really handy if you are looking for a particular submission. So as you can see, you can just select the submission type, the time and the date and things as well. You can also find the correlation ID for a submission, and what the correlation ID is like a unique identifier for them. So this is great if HMRC contact you about a particular submission that you've made, or if you need to kind of query something with HMRC yourself too. It just means that both of you can be on the same page about exactly which submission that you're talking about. And the correlation ID, it's made up, it's kind of a long string of numbers and letters. You can also delete entries from the eSubmissions log too, but please note that this does not delete or undo submissions that have gone to HMRC. They're with HMRC now, you aren't able to delete those, but it does delete and kind of tidy up the eSubmissions log, so it'll just delete from there. You can also print the submission or notice details if you do keep record of this, you've got that option there. And you can view further details of submissions or applied notices to see what information and which employees were included too. So again, really great for troubleshooting too. Now, if you are troubleshooting, particularly an FPS submission, and you need a bit more information about what was included, the FPS viewer can provide that for you. So that's another feature that I do want to mention. So the FPS viewer, this does let you see what's been included in a particular FPS that you've already submitted. And you also have the flexibility to add or remove columns from the list to kind of tailor the information that's relevant to you, depending on what information that you need. So let's go to Payroll. We'll go for one last quick demo, and I do want to show you the FPS viewer. So again, this is going to be from the eSubmissions tasks. We can see this is also where you would find the eSubmissions log, so if you needn't to go into that. But I will just go ahead and click FPS viewer. So in here on the left, you've got the different FPS submissions that you've made with the date and time. So for example, this one I can see I've sent today, 20th of November 2024 at 13 minutes past 11. So you do get the date and time stamp there. And that goes for all of the submissions on the left. And on the right as well, you've got that kind of main screen, which will show the information. So things like the employee's full name, surname, NI number, the pay date as well. So 30th of November, we can see. We've got the tax month, so we can see it's tax month 8, plus a lot more information. We can also see the start date for my new employee. But let's say I was troubleshooting a tax code issue, for example, for an employee, and I needed to check what tax codes HMRC had received for an employee. What I could actually do is click this columns button at the top of the FPS viewer. And I've got all of these options of extra information that I can add in the FPS viewer. So I've got loads of different year-to-date values for things like SSP, maternity pay, student loans, postgraduate loans, etc. I'm actually going to go ahead and click tax code in this scenario and then click close. And it does refresh this viewer with an extra column in there for the tax code. So you can add any of that extra information in that you wish just to help with whatever you're looking at. But in this case, I could, look at the tax code for employee number 8, for example, and I could compare that to other submissions that I've submitted and kind of get the information that I need. And with all of the submissions at the bottom, you do have a bit of a breakdown of the liability too, which of course will update with the figures depending on which submission that you've got selected on the left. And then of course options as well in the bottom left to print or export the figures in here. So that is the FPS viewer, and you can find that just from the eSubmissions tasks. Super handy feature though for those of you who do need to reconcile figures or dig a little bit deeper into what's been sent to HMRC. And that just brings us on to the last section of the webinar. This one is just a short one, just about the personal tax account. So not everybody knows about this, but I do think it's a really handy resource for individuals. So this is just to make you aware of it, really. So the personal tax account is an online service that allows people to check their records and manage their details with HMRC. And some of its key features include income tax management. So an individual can check their income tax estimate and tax code. They can view their income from work over the past 5 years and check how much income tax they've been paid, that they've paid in the previous 5 years too. Tax returns and refunds. So an individual can fill in, send and view personal tax returns and also claim tax refunds if there are due any. Personal details and benefits. They can update their personal information, things like their name and address, as well as check and manage benefits such as child benefits and tax credits. National insurance and state pension too, and also things like employment and benefits from work. So they can update details about benefits that they receive, maybe company car details or medical insurance. And also the unique taxpayer reference. So they can find their UTR number on here, which is essential for things like self-assessment too. So if you aren't aware what this is, definitely take a look at the links on the slides. You can access it from your phone as well, so it does have an app. It doesn't need to just be on the computer. And you can find loads and loads of helpful information and figures on this account. So this will be something really, really great to make your employees aware of, just in case they aren't already. And just to finish things off, one last thing that I would like to show you is just a diagram, I guess you would call it, of the RTI process, just a bit more of a visual way of kind of showing what the RTI does and what it kind of feeds into. So we'll start with the employer, which is going to be most of you watching this today, I think, so the company, the payroll, the employer. And from this, the payroll would then be processed. And during this process, the pay slips are going to be produced for the employees, which does include things like payments and deductions to the employee. So they get paid, and yeah, that's made up of a variety of payments and deductions. But back to the employer, they would then submit the RTI, which is going to be your FPS or EPS, which will go through your government gateway account. You'll get a success message that comes back to payroll, which confirms this submission, and then that will submit the payroll data across to HMRC. Now, this information that HMRC gets can then be fed down to the personal tax account, so it can go the other way, which the employee can then use to check their records, manage the details, as well as lots more. So I do find it interesting just kind of seeing it all like this, just figuring out kind of what feeds into where, as it does go kind of both ways. But that does bring us to the end of the webinar content for your guide to HMRC submissions. Hopefully you have found some of this information useful. Just kind of going through and breaking those submissions down a little bit more. But before I do say goodbye, still just a minute or two to kind of go through some further support that we've got available for you all. Starting with upcoming webinars. So we do have our next HR advice webinar, which is going to be all about the do's and don'ts for a successful Christmas party season. That's going to be on the 3rd of December, and I will be joined by some very special guests from Advisor Plus. They'll be giving real life examples of situations according to this topic, obviously, and some real life advice too. So it should be a really, really great session. Me and Duncan also have some upcoming webinars for Sage 50 Payroll. So we've got some Sage HR showcases coming up. We've also got our second part for Get Your Payroll Done, which is going to be focusing on those month-end tasks. And we've also got some festive payroll webinars too. We've got a part 1 and part 2 with a couple of dates for each of those. So definitely check those out at sage.co.uk/webinars. Something else to be aware of is our brand new one-to-one bespoke training options too. So these are going to be really great if you're looking for a bit of further training on payroll, or maybe you're new to payroll and just need a bit of a helping hand there. but we do have training bundles including things on admin automation, holidays and statutory absence, the pensions module and a lot more. So if that is something that you want a bit more information on, email us at ukisageuniversity@sage.com for a personalised quote. We also have the Sage Help Centre, so this is sage.co.uk/help. Here you can search the knowledge base, you can access support guides, demonstration videos, recordings of our webinars, and should you need to, you can get in touch and contact the experts too. And lastly, we do have Sage University, so sageu.com. Here you can set up a completely free account. You can access e-learning and bite-sized learning, as well as earn product certification too. So this is a great way to expand your knowledge on Sage 50 Payroll, but we do also have courses on other Sage products too, so Sage 50 accounts and things like that. But that has brought us to the end of the webinar. I just want to thank you very much for your time this morning. I know we have run over by a couple of minutes. Definitely had a lot to talk about in this session today. So if you are leaving us now, remember you can download the handouts until we do end the webinar, and feel free to copy and paste any of the Q&A if you do want to keep any of those questions answers. I can see a lot of questions there in the questions panel. It looks like you've kept Duncan quite busy today. So yeah, if you do want to keep any of those, just copy and paste them. But last ask from me, there will be a short survey that you'll get as you exit the webinar. If you do have just a minute to fill that in, leave some scores and some comments if you've got any. We would really, really appreciate that. We do read every single comment and just try and make these the best that they can be. But yeah, that's it from us. So do keep an eye on your emails for a recording of the webinar coming through. You should receive that sometime this afternoon. But we hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Hopefully we will see you on another webinar very soon. So on behalf of me and Duncan, we will see you next time. It's goodbye for now.